Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. I was sitting around here in my room the other day, just staring at the ceiling and thinking about life and other important things. And all of a sudden, I was struck by a thought. You know, when you have those moments where you're just sitting there thinking about things and something seems to come out of nowhere. And this is what I thought. Spanish literature is so underrated. Okay, this is something that troubled me all of a sudden. It made me feel bad, like almost physically ill, I would say. And the question was, okay, Jorge, Spanish literature is underrated. What can you do about it? And I know that I'm just a guy in a corner, that I don't really amount to much. But then I thought something that a friend of mine said many, many years ago. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? So actually, I thought there is something that I can do about this. I can make a video. The next question, of course, was, okay, so where are you going to start? Spanish literature is a very vast area. The answer to that was very easy too. I can always start at the beginning, and that is what I want to do. I want to share with you my ideas on the Song of the Cid, Cantar de Mio Cid, as we know it in Spanish. So I am really looking, at the beginning or one of the foundational texts of Spanish literature. This is a text that I encountered for the first time in high school and that I read more than one time in college in different contexts, right? Now, you know how it is with this type of text, right? You read something like Dante and you're like, oh my God, right? Go to Italy, right? And ask high school kids there what they think about Dante. You're going to get a completely different response. Same thing with Don Quixote in the Spanish-speaking world. Maybe same thing with Shakespeare, right? In England and in the US. Well, the poem or the Song of the Cid is one of those texts. It's a very similar situation. When we had to read it in Argentina, when I was in high school, we were not happy about it. We would say, oh, tenemos que leer el Cid, es un bodrio. And I'm pretty sure the same reaction you would have in Spain with this text. It's required reading, period. And we all know what we think about required reading, especially when we are young, right? So it's one of those situations. But let me tell you this is actually a very good poem. Now that I can judge it, knowing a little bit more about literature and having experienced other types of literature and even more literature in the context of Spanish, I have really come to love this poem. I think it was the second time that I read it in college that I fell in love with it. So it was really one of those moments for me. A text that I did not like and that all of a sudden had a different aura to it. And I ended up really enjoying it. So a couple of weeks ago, what I was asking myself was, I wonder how this reads in English. Really, there have been translations of the Song of the Cid for many years, but recently, or relatively recently, in the year 2009, a translation by Burton Raffel appeared, and this is the one that was published by Penguin. I absolutely love Burton Raffel's translations. I have a copy of Beowulf somewhere here, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which are two of my favorites. He has also translated Gargantua and Pantagruel, Don Quixote, of course, the Canterbury Tales, and many other really, really important books. There's also another wonderful thing about this edition, and that is the fact that it is a dual language parallel text edition. So everybody's happy here. If you don't want to read the English translation, you have the Spanish text in Old Spanish right here. So you can check it out and you can compare the two versions, okay? Let me tell you this. I think this in English, I absolutely loved how it reads, okay? Is it the same thing? Of course it's not. It will never be the same thing, no matter how fantastic the translator is. So that is a given, okay? This is a different story. It is just wonderfully told, and it's really a tour de force. Now, the original is in Old Spanish, so something to consider here is that it is an obstacle. Language is an obstacle, even for us native Spanish readers. So I could even tell you that in a way, I enjoyed reading this text more in English than I did in the original Spanish because the language barrier was not present anymore. So, in a way, I would say that I really enjoyed this English translation even more than I did the original. So what do we have here? The Song of the Cid, right? This is an epic poem, as you probably know, based on a historical figure, a guy by the name of Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, also known as Ruy Diaz de Vivar. And people would call him the Cid. Okay, now what is Cid? Cid is basically a translation into Castilian of the Arabic term Sayyid, which means Lord. So when you have something like the title of this poem, the Cantar de Mio Cid, it's the song of my Lord. That would be the translation of the title directly into modern terms. The historical figure that this is based on passed away in the year 1099, just to give you a little bit of context there. So we are talking about medieval times. So as I said before, the poem is in Old Spanish, right? But if you compare Old Spanish to contemporary Spanish, there is not as much difference as if you compared Old English to contemporary English. You know how it is. If you grab a copy of Beowulf and you look at it in the original, it's just very difficult to tell what it is saying for a contemporary English speaker. Old Spanish is not really like that. There is not a lot of difference. And I'm going to read you a little bit of this so that you can see, how different it is from contemporary Spanish. What we have here is a manuscript, right, that this is based on, that was copied by a man by the name of Per Abad in the year 1207. So that is the oldest text that we have, the oldest version of this. And in terms of the contents, right, we have 3,700 lines of poetry divided into 152 cantos, which are in turn divided into 3 cantares, right? So even though it's a Cantar de Mio Cid, it is really, divided into 3 of those. So 152 stanzas, 3 cantos, right? In Spanish, the way that we measure rhythm is not like in English. So we don't have beats. We don't have something like iambic pentameter or any of those, right? What we do is we count syllables. And many times when you read lyrical poetry, you're going to see that there are 12 syllables or 8 syllables or something like that. In this case, we have really an irregular pattern. You're going to see that many lines here have 14 syllables, but not all of them do. Okay, so it's really irregular. It's kind of free structure in that aspect. And then regarding rhyme, right? In English, what you favor most of the time is consonant rhyme. In this text and in many other texts in Spanish, we have what we call assonant rhyme. What is the difference here? Well, a consonant rhyme would be life and strife, for example. Assonant rhyme would be something like life and bright. Okay, if somebody wrote a poem in English and they gave it to you and they rhymed life with bright, you'd be like, come on, that doesn't really rhyme, okay? Well, in Spanish, that type of rhyme is called assonant rhyme, and it's perfectly all right. As a matter of fact, you can find it throughout the history of Spanish poetry, and even in the first poetry books of Pablo Neruda. So you can see how long this tradition has lasted. Now, one question that people ask about this book that has driven people nuts from time immemorial, right, is whether this is part of an oral tradition or if it is the work of a single author. And there have been many essays written on both sides of the issue that you are welcome to check out. I don't personally think it's one of those, it's not something that troubles my sleep, let's just put it that way, but there have been convincing arguments on both sides of that issue. Now, if somebody asks me, okay, Jorge, what is the salient feature of the Song of the Cid? I would say that is its realism. Okay, this is a realist epic poem, especially if you compare it to other epic poems of that time. There is no supernatural element here, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But once again, realism. Okay, you're not going to find any, fighting monsters or fighting dragons here or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with fighting monsters or fighting dragons. I do it all the time, but it's one of those things, okay? This is a realist poem. So now that we have looked at some background, let's actually explore this poem itself. We're going to start with the first canto, okay? The poem begins with the notion of exile, okay? And then towards the end of the first canto, we have another important theme, which is the theme of conquest, okay? So let's go back to the beginning. At the beginning of this poem, the Cid is being exiled by the king Don Alfonso. Okay? And what I wanted to do is I wanted to read you the first stanza so that you can get a feel for the language, right? How it sounds, how Old Spanish sounds, and also that assonant rhyme that I told you about. So this is just the first stanza, which is about 10 or 11 lines long. It's very short. And by the way, this is not the way the poem actually begins, because the first part of the manuscript is missing. We don't have that part. So this is the beginning of the poem as we have it. That's what I wanted to clarify. So this is it, first stanza. De los sus ojos tan fuerte mi entre llorando, tornaba la cabeza e estábalos catando. Vio puertas abiertas e usos sin cañados, alcándaras vacías, sin pieles e sin mantos, e sin falcones e sin actores mudados. Sospiró mi Cid, que mucho había grandes cuidados. Fabló mi Cid, bien e tan mesurado. Grado a ti, Señor, Padre, que estás en alto. Esto me han vuelto mis enemigos malos. So if you speak Spanish, you have probably understood quite a bit of that. That is the difference between Old Spanish and contemporary Spanish. So, but the poem really begins with a scene of injustice, because the king has decided to exile Rodrigo, right, El Cid, based on some lies that some people who are envious of the Cid have told the king. Okay, so this is really a very sad beginning, because the Cid is just, he knows that this is not fair, right? He is given 9 days to leave. People cannot help him because the king has cautioned people against helping him. There's nothing that he can do, right? And even though he is exiled unjustly, okay, the Cid accepts this. He accepts this fate. He holds no grudge against the king, right? And that illustrates one of his most important character traits, which is that of loyalty. He is going to remain loyal to the king no matter what, even though a huge injustice has been committed against him. Something to keep in mind as you read the Song of the Cid is that concept of the hero's journey. You know how it is? At the beginning, he leaves his land, right? There is at one point this call to adventure, to quest, right? The sense of the quest. So that is definitely present here in the poem of the Cid. Also, at one point, there is a death that can be symbolic, and the resurrection, and then a return, right, to the native land, transformed, right? So keep in mind that journey of the hero as you read this, because you can definitely apply that to the Song of the Cid, right? One element, however, that I wanted to emphasize that I have mentioned before is that part of that hero's journey is the concept of supernatural aid, right? This, as I said, is a realist poem, so you don't really have a lot of that. There is only one part, there is only one element that could be considered to be supernatural. There is one moment in which the Archangel Gabriel appears to the Cid. But check this out, even then, this happens within the context of a dream. So even then, the poem takes away the supernatural element from a scene like that to emphasize the fact that this is a realist poem, right? There is no magic here. This is a completely humanistic story. Now, the central theme. What is the central theme of the Song of the Cid, right? There are many important themes, but I would say the most important one is really a theme that is very important throughout Spanish and Hispanic literature, which is the theme of honor. To lose one's honor is basically worse than to lose one's life, okay, in the context of this society. And everything to the Cid is really a matter of honor, right? His enemies have tarnished his reputation. He needs to clear his name. And basically, this is a question of honor. There's another important topic here, which is that of fate, right? As I told you before, the Cid is exiled, and he accepts his fate almost as if it were something inevitable, right? It's kind of like, okay, it's written, right? There is nothing that I can do about that. That also shows another quality of the Cid, which is his temperance. Okay, that is one way that I can translate the Spanish word abnegación. He's abnegado, right? Abnegado is like somebody who accepts things, right? This is the way things are, just accept it, just do your best with the situation. And basically that's what he does. Let me tell you a little bit about other characters that you will find in the Song of the Cid, because it's not all about him. Of course, he is the central figure, right? But there are other important ones. He has a friend named Alvar Fañez, okay? But he calls him Minasha. Minasha means my brother, right? So he's like a brother to him. He's his right hand man, right? And he is always with him. Also, concept of loyalty right there between the two of them. We have, of course, the figure of his wife, Doña Ximena, who is basically the archetype of the Christian wife. And he has two daughters who become very important towards the second half, basically in the second half of the Song of the Cid, Doña Elvira and Doña Sol. Okay, so look out for them because they are really, really important figures, all of them. My favorite scene, if I had to choose one, in Canto 1, appears towards the end of that canto. As I told you before, it begins with exile, right, this first canto, but towards the end we have the concept of conquest. And basically what happens is that he is conquering lands, right? And there's a king that, or a count actually, not a king, but a count who is defeated in battle. And he's really depressed, right? So he is like not eating and everything. And you see how the Cid responds to that. And that really speaks volumes about his character. Another scene that I really like in Canto number 1 is the Cid's farewell to his wife. It's a very touching scene, you know, when he's leaving in exile and he leaves her behind with his daughters who are going to stay at a convent while he is away. Here's an important thing about this poem. Unlike other epic poems of the time, the Cid shows you the hero enjoying the domestic life. Okay, you can see him actually, you know, being a husband whenever he is not fighting. So that is something quite different from other epic poems of this time. So I mentioned before the idea of conquest, right? As soon as the Cid leaves his home, he wastes absolutely no time. Okay, he begins to conquer lands and to demand the tribute of the people that he conquers. So they have to pay him. And what he does is he begins to get rich pretty much, and he starts to send all those things to King Alfonso, hoping that the king will forgive him. And keep in mind that the Cid didn't do anything wrong. Okay, he keeps sending these things, hoping that he will be forgiven. That shows you other qualities of his, like his generosity, his magnanimity, and all of these things, right? So really, everything that he does illuminates one character trait of the Cid. We move on to Canto number 2, okay? So the Cid continues to conquer these lands and he sends all of these gifts to the king, right? And what the king does is kind of like forgiving him, but little by little. You have to understand his situation. The king cannot be like, oh, okay, you're sending me all of his stuff. This is really nice. It's fine. Come back. We're cool, right? He cannot do that because he would lose face. So he has to think about his reputation too. Now, at this point, when the Cid is sending all of these gifts to the king, something crucial happens that really, you know, sets the action moving, and it is this: the nobles of Carrion, okay, the Infantes de Carrion, when they see all of these gifts and all of this wealth, they start thinking, okay, you know, look at the Cid, right? It wouldn't be a bad idea at all if we could marry his daughters, right? So they're hoping to get some of this wealth, right? And it is here that the poem gets complicated, really. So let's recap a little bit. Canto number 1, you have the concepts of exile and conquest. And in Canto number 2, you have themes of reconciliation and also of marriage, right? Because of what I just told you about the Infantes de Carrion. And finally, in Canto number 3, this one begins with one of my favorite episodes of the entire poem, which is the lion episode, okay? So here's the thing. The Cid has a lion as a pet. And of course, this lion is usually kept inside the cage. Well, one day the lion escapes. And this happens exactly when the Cid is sleeping, right? So the lion escapes, everybody's like freaking out, right? Everybody's really, really scared, particularly the nobles of Carrion, who react in a most unmanly way. Okay, basically they run away and they start screaming. And everybody's like making fun of them, right? The Cid wakes up, right? And he's like, what's wrong here, right? What's happening? And people are like, oh yeah, you know, the lion escaped. Oh my God, you know, it's on the loose. It's gonna kill us all. The Cid gets up, right? Goes to the lion, grabs the lion by the scruff, and he takes him and puts him inside the cage, just like that, okay? And of course, everybody starts making fun of the Infante de Carrion and all that. People who had probably been just as scared as they were, right? Because that is the usual thing in those cases. But the Cid is very generous also towards them because he's like, Of course, he is calm and in control throughout this whole situation, but he tells people, look, just don't laugh at the infantes, right? It's fine. He's very sympathetic towards them. He's like, okay, the lion is in the cage, let's just turn the page on this whole episode, let's forget about it. But the nobles of Carrion are just not going to forget about this, okay? One of the reasons why they're not going to forget about it is because it really touches their honor, because everybody saw them being cowardly, right? So that is really one of the episodes that, is central to the poem. The whole episode really illustrates all of those character traits of the Cid, but also, something important is also the reaction of the lion, okay? Because that also builds up the character of the Cid. Even the lion is scared, okay, of him. Even the lion respects him. So he's really a very, like, imposing, right? A commanding figure, I would say, right? Now, the Infantes de Carrion, after this incident, they proved to be very cowardly in battle, too. So that's a problem, right? And at one point, they're like, okay, look, we have enough money, right? We have gotten quite a bit of the Cid's wealth already. We're married to his daughters. Let's just get out of here. This is not the kind of life that we want. This is very dangerous, right? So they're like, let's just leave. Now, the problem is that, as I told you, they are still mad about that lion episode, okay? They just cannot forget this thing. So what they decide to do is they decide to hurt the Cid, by touching what he prizes most, which is, of course, his daughters. This is where the poem gets ugly, okay? This is where it gets ugly because the Infantes de Carrion, what they do is something so low, okay, so base and vile, truly disgusting, right? You're not gonna believe it. You're gonna hate these characters, and it's not what they do, just what they do, okay, which is bad enough, but it's the circumstances too, okay, because these are their wives. These are the daughters of the Cid, who was really good to them and very generous and sympathetic towards them, right? So that is what the aggravating circumstance here, because the Cid is really a very good man. After the event, right, which I'm not going to reveal, but after the event, what happens is that the Cid has to ask the king to do justice, okay, because something awful has happened here. So that's what happens towards the end. There is a duel, right, a challenge, a duel, and another incident that I'm not going to reveal because I don't want to ruin the whole reading experience for you. Now, a couple of things in terms of symbols to look out for. One of them is swords, okay? The sword is, there are two swords at least here, and the sword is, and of course, a symbol of honor and also a symbol of virility, right? It's a phallic symbol if you want to go there, right? But there are two swords here, the colada and the tizon, okay? They have names, just like Excalibur. So look out when you read the poem for how those swords change hands. And the other important symbolic element are beards, okay? The Cid has a very long beard that he ties, right? He keeps it tied. He also covers it with a handkerchief, because one of the worst insults in that time was to pluck somebody's beard, right? So, if you ever find yourself transported to medieval Spain, just do not pluck somebody's beard, okay? Don't do this, because it's the most insulting thing that you could possibly do. Beards are also a symbol of virility, right, and of honor. So look out for those. And I also wanted to mention, since we're talking about symbols and important tropes, right, of this type of epic poetry, the Cid's horse, right, Babieca. He has a name also. He's very important. And you may remember he's mentioned in Don Quixote. Actually, El Cid is mentioned in Don Quixote by name. If you remember at the very beginning, when he's thinking about all those knights who have inspired him, he says something like, the narrator, right, says something like Don Quixote thought that El Cid was a pretty good knight, but that he doesn't compare to these other knights that had inspired him. I think the Cantar de Mio Cid would probably be a little bit too realistic for our friend Don Quixote. But, that is just my opinion. If you want to check out a movie version of the Song of the Cid, there's of course a famous one. This movie is based on other texts too. So it's basically the second half of the movie that is based on the actual Song of the Cid, as we have it here in this translation. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the bottom line is I really loved reading The Song of the Cid in English. This was a very enjoyable read in a translation that is simply a tour de force, and that just, it's just very, very satisfying. This is one of the foundational texts of Spanish literature. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I have this lacuna here, Spanish literature, and you don't know where to begin, this would be a very good place to begin. So I really urge you to read it. It's just lots of fun, in this translation by Burton Raffel from 2009. I would be delighted to hear your thoughts on this poem if you do decide to read it, especially, in comparison to other epic poems of that time. So that would really be amazing if we could, have a dialogue about that. So do you have any questions, comments, recommendations? Just let me know. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.